Cael leaned back against his desk. The casual mask slipped completely away. What remained was raw intensity that made the air feel thin.
4 years,
he said. His voice went quiet. Flat. The playfulness gone like smoke.
4 years of investigating, building networks, tracing patterns, following leads that went nowhere, getting people killed for information that didn't matter.
He pushed off from the desk, paced to the window, stared out at darkness beyond the glass.
And then we found it. The thing that explained everything. The impossible answer that made all the pieces fit.
He turned back, met my eyes.
The Emperor is a synthesis cleaver.
The words hit like physical force. My vision tunneled. The wine glass slipped from my fingers, shattered on the floor. Red wine spreading across wood like blood. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. He knows. The Emperor knows synthesis magic exists. Has known for centuries. And if he finds out about me, my hands shook. The room tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table to keep from falling.
Liv?
Cael's voice came from far away.
Are you?
He's looking for me. The words tore out of my throat. Raw. Panicked. That's why. That's why the scrutiny after Silvrath. The political attention. He knows what I am. Or suspects. And if he finds out for certain, I couldn't finish. Couldn't say it out loud. But the implications crashed through me like waves. The Emperor had synthesis magic. Had wielded it for 3 centuries. Knew what it could do. What it was worth. And if he discovered another synthesis mage, one young and untrained and infinitely easier to control than himself, Cael crossed to me in 2 strides. His hands gripped my shoulders. Solid, grounding.
Breathe.
He commanded.
Just breathe.
I tried. Failed. My chest was too tight. Everything spinning.
We spent 4 years confirming it.
He said. His voice went calm. Steady. Cutting through the panic.
Cross-referencing reports. Interviewing witnesses. Tracking imperial records across centuries.
He kept his eyes locked on mine.
The Emperor has reigned for over 300 years. Wielded magic that should kill him from accumulation. Survived dissolution events that would destroy anyone else. Performed techniques that combine binding and cleaving in ways that violate fundamental magical law.
He tapped one particular report.
He's a synthesis cleaver. Has been since before the boundary wall was built. That explains his legendary power. His impossible longevity. His ability to reshape reality itself.
My breathing slowed. The panic receded enough that I could think again. Cael's hands on my shoulders. The broken glass at my feet. Wine pooling across floorboards. I forced myself to focus. To push past the terror and actually process what he was saying. If the Emperor had synthesis magic, if he'd had it for centuries, then why isn't he using it? The question came out hoarse, shaky but coherent. The boundary wall is weakening. Chaos vents are increasing. Coordinated attacks are happening. If he has synthesis magic, why isn't he fixing it? Cael's expression went dark. His hands dropped from my shoulders.
Either he's complicit or too compromised to act.
The silence stretched. Heavy. Terrible. I wrapped my arms around myself. Tried to stop shaking. The panic had shifted into something else. Something colder. More analytical. The part of me that had survived father's caravans by calculating dangers and planning escape routes. Complicit, I repeated. The word tasted like poison. You think the Emperor is causing this?
I think someone with synthesis magic could stop it.
His voice went hard, cold.
The seed is made of crystallized chaos. It's the source of all corruption, the wound that never heals. Synthesis magic could theoretically destroy it, could seal the vents, could reverse the spread.
He paused.
But he doesn't. He lets the wall weaken, lets people die, lets the world slowly collapse while he sits in his palace doing nothing.
He moved closer. His presence filled the space between us.
So either he can't act because something has compromised him, or he won't act because he's part of whatever is orchestrating the attacks. Either way, we can't rely on him, can't trust him, can't wait for him to save us.
His eyes burned with desperate intensity.
You're a synthesis binder, Liv.
He leaned forward.
You're irreplaceable.
The weight of his words pressed against my chest, made it hard to breathe.
Everyone says destroying the seed is impossible.
His voice dropped, went quiet, fierce.
I don't care, because you're impossible too. You cast black amber twice without training, without understanding. You did things that shouldn't exist.
He met my eyes.
So yes, I want your power desperately, because I believe it's the only weapon sharp enough to kill the seed.
He stopped, swallowed hard. When he spoke again, his voice cracked.
And because somewhere in all that righteous mission, there's a 12-year-old boy who wants revenge for having to kill the monster that used to be his sister.
The confession hung in the air. Raw, honest, stripped of all protection.
There is my truth, Liv.
His eyes held mine.
What is yours? Fair's fair, yeah?
He moved to the kitchenette. The sound of glass on glass. Wine pouring. He returned with a fresh glass. Pressed it into my hands.
Drink?
He said quietly.
You're shaking.
I was. I hadn't noticed. The wine was cool against my palm. I took a sip, then another. Let the warmth spread through me. Cael settled back against his desk, gave me space. Waited. I sat frozen. The wine glass anchoring me. The weight of his confession pressed against my chest until I couldn't distinguish it from my own heartbeat. I should still be outraged. He'd tracked me, investigated me, engineered this entire meeting, built a web of manipulation around me before I even knew his name. But all I could think about was Kieran, my younger brother with his perpetually amused expression. The way he never worried about anything, how he'd make me laugh when father's demands became too heavy, how he'd sneak me pastries when I was working late on ledgers. What would I do to protect him? The answer came instantly. Unbidden. Certain. Anything. Everything. I'd burn the world down if it meant keeping Kieran safe from the horror Cael described. From becoming a monster that begged me to save it while I killed it with my bare hands. I'd manipulate. I'd lie. I'd use anyone and anything if it gave me the power to prevent that nightmare. I looked up, found that desire back in Cael's eyes. Burning, naked, impossible to parse. Was it need to use my power against the seed? Or need to have me right here on this table? I realized with a shock that ran through my entire body. I wasn't sure they were different things to this troubled, driven man. And worse. I wasn't sure it bothered me. The memory surfaced unbidden. How good the transfer felt during the tour. How different from the clinical necessity of rotation protocols. Even different from the desperate intensity with Dane. This was easy. Natural. Like breathing. My heart hammered. Heat flooded my face. My channels hummed with remembered pleasure that had nothing to do with survival and everything to do with the man watching me across this small space. I need to think. The words came out rough. I stood abruptly, nearly knocked over my chair. Wine-warm and dizzy with too many feelings I couldn't name. I fled toward the door. Behind me, Cael's voice followed. Light. Teasing. That roguish edge sliding back into place like armor.
Take all the time you need, Liv. Well, all the time we have anyway. Which, given the apocalypse and all, might not be quite as much as we'd like. But no pressure.
I grabbed the door handle, pulled it open, stepped into the corridor beyond. The door clicked shut behind me, muffling his voice, his presence, the weight of everything he'd just said. I leaned against the wall, pressed my forehead against cool stone, tried to breathe through the tightness in my chest. My channels still sang with foreign ash, his ash. The resonance felt too good, too right. Too much like something I wanted instead of something I needed. And that terrified me more than anything he'd said about the Emperor or the Seed or impossible missions to save the world. Because wanting him meant admitting desire without justification. And I didn't know how to do that. Didn't know how to separate what I felt from what I should feel. What I wanted from what was necessary. What was real from what was just the magic talking. I pushed off the wall, started walking. My feet carried me through corridors I barely registered, past students I didn't see, downstairs that might lead anywhere. I ended up in the gardens without meaning to. Night air cool against my flush skin. Stars visible overhead in patterns I didn't recognize this far north. The smell of pine and cold water and growing things. I found a bench beneath a tree I couldn't name. Sat down hard. Let my head fall into my hands. Dane. I should be thinking about Dane. Missing him. Counting days until I could see him again. 6 months felt like forever. 6 months without his steady presence, his brutal efficiency, his quiet certainty that we would survive whatever came. But when I closed my eyes, I saw Cael's face. Heard his voice cracking as he described killing his sister. Felt the desperate intensity of his need for something. Someone who could prevent that horror from happening to anyone else. I understood that need, recognized it bone deep, and worse, so much worse. I'd felt something when he transferred with me, something that went beyond survival, beyond necessity, beyond the careful rationalization that this was just tactical advantage or rotation protocol, or convenient access to compatible ash. I'd wanted it to feel good, had enjoyed it for its own sake, not because it saved me, not because it was practical, but because it felt amazing to cast with someone who made it easy, who matched my rhythm without effort, who didn't require careful calculation or conscious adjustment. The guilt hit like a sledgehammer. This wasn't Dane. This was another man's ash singing through my channels. Another man making my body respond with pleasure that had nothing to do with love or partnership or commitment. And it had felt good. Not the same as Dane, never the same. Dane was home, safety. The person I'd chosen when choosing felt impossible, but Cael was different. Sharp where Dane was solid. Controlled where Dane was responsive. like the difference between a precisely maintained flame and a roaring fire. Both gave warmth. Both could burn. I hated that I was comparing them. Hated that part of me was cataloging differences instead of just being grateful Cael had saved my life. Hated that I'd noticed how his eyes lingered on me. How his touch felt deliberate even when it should have been clinical. Hated most that some traitorous part of me wanted to go back to that room. Wanted to hear more about his mission. Wanted to feel that intensity directed at me again. I pressed my palms against my eyes until colors bloomed behind my lids. This was the wine talking. Just the wine. Making me notice things I shouldn't notice. Feel things I shouldn't feel. Tomorrow I'd wake up clear-headed, rational, capable of thinking through this properly. Tomorrow I'd figure out how to survive 6 months here without betraying everything I'd built with Dane. Tomorrow. But tonight, I sat in a strange garden under foreign stars and tried very hard not to think about how easy it would be to want this brilliant, broken man who'd just laid his entire soul bare and asked me to help him save the world. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the cold to seep through my clothes. Long enough for my thoughts to circle back on themselves until they made no sense. Eventually, I stood. My legs were stiff, unsteady. I made my way back through corridors that were mercifully empty. Students asleep or elsewhere. No one to see me stumbling back to my room like someone fleeing a crime scene. My door, my lock, my space. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, breathing hard like I'd been running. Safe. This was the safest academy in the north. Thornhaven had never had a polyp incident. Never had an infection breach their wards. The village had been a statistical anomaly. Lightning striking twice in the same impossible place. I knew this, understood it logically, but my hands were already moving. Black oil seeping from my fingertips before I could stop it. The ward I'd cast in the village had saved my life. Had given me warning. Had kept the crawlers out long enough to reach the roof. One ward. Simple. Basic. Not enough. I wove threads across the door. Then the window. Then the walls. Layer after layer. Geometric patterns overlapping until the entire room glowed with faint rainbow light. More. I needed more. Another layer. This one keyed to movement. Anything that tried to breach would trigger an alarm in my mind loud enough to wake me from dead sleep. Another. This one designed to crystallize on contact. Not permanent like black amber. Just enough to slow anything long enough for me to react. Another, and another, and another. My hands shook. The ink marks on my forearms darkened, spread. I was using too much, accumulating too fast. But I couldn't stop. The memory of that crawler, its wet sounds, the way it had moved, learning, hunting. I wove until the room was a fortress. Until every surface held wards layered so thick they hummed. Until I'd used more magic than I had in a month. Until my channels ached and the marks on my skin had spread to my elbows. Only then did I stop. Only then did I lower my hands and look at what I'd done. The room blazed with protective magic. Enough wards to stop a small army. Enough barriers to hold off anything short of a coordinated assault. Overkill. Absolute paranoid overkill. I didn't care. I stripped off my clothes with shaking hands, crawled into bed, pulled the blankets up to my chin like they could protect me from anything. The wards hummed. A constant presence at the edge of my awareness. I could feel them. Each layer. Each thread. Each geometric pattern holding firm. Safe. I was safe. I closed my eyes, tried to think of Dane, his steady presence, his brutal efficiency, his quiet certainty, the way he'd held me after the village, the way he'd promised to survive, to build a life. 6 months. Just 6 months until I could see him again. I reached for the memory of his ash. The familiar resonance. The way it felt like coming home. But what flooded my channels was different. Sharper. More controlled. Like a precisely maintained flame instead of a roaring fire. Cael's ash, still there. Still singing through my system from the transfer during the tour. From the brief contact when he'd steadied me during my panic attack. I tried to push it away. Tried to focus on Dane's memory instead. But Cael's resonance wouldn't fade. Wouldn't quiet. Just hummed there like the wards surrounding me. Present. Undeniable. Too comfortable for something that should feel foreign. I turned onto my side, pulled the blanket tighter. Tomorrow I'd figure this out. Tomorrow I'd remember why Dane was home and Cael was just necessary. Tomorrow. But tonight I fell asleep in a fortress of my own paranoid making, wrapped in blankets that smelled like northern pine, with another man's ash singing lullabies through my channels.